All right, let's get started. Will you do me a quick favor and type into the chat box? Yep, I'm here. I'm ready. And if you have several people in the room with you, will you also just let me know that so that when we go to a breakout room, I can be sure that I can set those up correctly. So will you type into the chat box? Yep, I'm here, I'm ready. And if there are more than one set of folks in the room, please let me know. Awesome. Thanks, Jessica. All right. We will give other folks a shot. If you are here, please type into the chat box that you are here and ready to go. We are ready to get started. Okay, great. Thanks, Denise. Appreciate that. It's all right. Very good. No problem. Okay, well, we are going to get started so that we can make good use of your time and honor your sharp attendance today. So welcome, everybody. Happy to see you. Will you please think about what might be your perfect day? What might be one or two things that would make it a perfect day? You don't have to describe the whole thing, but what would make it a perfect day? And please type that into the chat box, just a couple of bullets that would indicate a perfect day. What might be your perfect day? Warm weather, a beach, and a book. Nice. Denise. Having your students follow directions the first time. That's one of my favorite responses ever. I love it. The beach. All right. This seems to be a beach crowd, and you all from Caldwell have a lot of similarity there. Good for you. All righty. So, we start our sessions every day with the Scarborough rope. The reason that we start them with the Scarborough rope is so that we are anchored in the science of reading. Thanks, Katrina. Anchored in the science of reading and anchored in to what are the pieces that we as instructors should be thinking about when we are building our literacy instruction. So we're going to be working on the bottom strand today, as we often do. And we're really going to be working on all three pieces because we're going to be working on something called orthographic mapping. And you may be really familiar with orthographic mapping, so I hope I can add a titch of information to your understanding. So orthographic mapping actually is a process, a cognitive process. And in order to have that cognitive process take place, all three of those threads at the bottom strand are necessary. So we're really working down there in the bottom strand today. So when we read, these are things you all know. When we read, we recognize letters and then we combine them together into graphemes or spelling patterns. We connect those to speech sounds, as we have been talking over the course of our work together. We connect the speech sound to the symbol. We connect the meaning to recognize those words. What are those words? Once we have the word put into our memory, then our meaning processor begins to instantly connect meaning. And then as we activate those two pieces, the meaning processor is instantaneously connecting our speech, the meaning to the speech sounds and the symbols. So orthographic mapping, this is a term that's being used all over the country, actually all over the globe. and sometimes it is a little bit misunderstood. So we're going to make sure we have a good base of understanding of what orthographic mapping is. So it is a process that happens in the brain. It is an invisible process that we cannot see happening. We see the results of it when it does or doesn't happen, but it is the process we use in our brain to store printed words in our long-term memory. You can't teach orthographic mapping. You can't have an orthographic mapping lesson because it is a process that is embedded in our neural pathways to be able to take print into long-term memory. However, though, there are things we can do that assist the brain in that process. We can help students engage in activities that cause that orthographic mapping to take place in a strong, efficient way. And the way that we do that is we foster proficiency in phonological awareness, and we've been working on that together, all the way through manipulation, which we've also been talking about, from basic isolation of sounds all the way up to substitution, omission, delete, addition for phonological awareness. And then also the letter sound connection. Students need that letter sound connection to be able to have the process of orthographic mapping take place. And then finally, connect those sounds in our oral language to written language or to print. So when we say letter sounds, a lot of folks say to me, how important is it that my students know letter names? Or should they mostly know letter sounds? And actually, the letter names are designed for the brain to use for spelling. We do need the brain to be able to retrieve the symbol quickly. That's really more of a processing mechanism. Can the students retrieve those quickly? But it is the sounds, the letter and the sound connection, that actually help students do that long-term orthographic mapping. So when we think about it, let's think about what a student has to do in order to be able to put a word into long-term memory. So if I say the word pin, they hear the word pin, they break the sounds apart, pin. They have to hold the order of those sounds in a word. The p is first, is in the middle, n's at the end. Then they have to match those in a printed letter sequence. They have to go get the P, go get the I, go get the N, and put them together in that order, and then they blend them back together. That's if I'm going to have them write the word pin. And it's actually the other way around if they're going to read the word pin. So they see the word pin on the paper. They have to look at the P, assign it with a P, look at the I, assign it with an I, look at the N, assign it with an N. Then they have to go back and blend those sounds all together, pin, and then put them into a unit or a word and store it in long-term memory. So in actuality, when we are working with both and decoding, which is print to brain, and encoding, brain to print, both of those help students with that sound symbol mapping into a unit and then storing that word into long-term memory. So when you hear the term orthographic mapping, I want you to think about a couple of things. I want you to think about, number one, it's a process in the brain. You can't teach it. Number two, you can facilitate that process in the brain. Some students may need way more repetitions to have that mapping take place. We know that students with dyslexia often take 5, 6, 7 more opportunities. Welcome, Shoshone. 7 more opportunities, 10 more opportunities of this sound symbol work to be able to map that into long-term memory. So orthographic mapping is storing words in long-term memory. It highly depends on the ability to take the sound and the symbol together with both decoding and encoding. A lot of times people say to me, well, what part of the lesson, what part of my foundational skills lesson is designed to support that orthographic mapping process? And here they are. Actually, every part of your lesson. I did not put the phonological awareness, which is at the top of this triangle. This is really a triangle that represents the entire foundational skills lesson and each of the routines that would need to be in place within that lesson. So phonological awareness is not, it is a part of supporting orthographic mapping because it has to, you have to foster the ability to hear those sounds. So that's actually, this is why your foundational skills lesson is built in the way that it is. It is built this way because it takes about this long, number one, and it takes these specific types of routines to support that orthographic mapping process. So I want to go through each one of them just for a minute to make sure that you are, we have a common understanding of what each of these routines do. So when you do the work with the sound spelling cards, that immediately is the first time in the lesson where the sound and the symbol are connected. The card is the apple, the sound is a, the spelling is a. It's the first time the a and the a, letter A, are put together within a lesson. Usually, it is the first or second thing that we do in our foundational skills lesson by design. It is meant to scaffold and structure and support the students with the picture, the sound, and the spelling, which is the very first anchor for that orthographic mapping process. Then you'll see the next routine on my list is sound spelling review. That's really just with flashcards or on a chart, actually just reviewing those sounds that you just saw on the card. So you start them on the card with the concrete picture. The next routine down is the sound spelling review, where really it's just the letter cards, where there is no picture and no sound cue for them. They just have the symbol and the sound has to be retrieved from their phonological processor. Then the blending routines. Shelby and I are getting a chance to be in all of the schools this month. It's our site visit month, October and February, and we'll get to do that with you all next year. So we are in Idaho right now, visiting all of the schools in the project. And this is one area where I see that we can probably improve our work with our blending routines. So later, not today, but later, we'll do some work around the idea of blending routines and which blending routines do which job for the brain and which blending routines are actually targeted towards which skills we want kids to be able to do. So blending routines are a major part of your work in supporting orthographic mapping. Dictation or spelling, however you would label that, the very same, as long as you are doing the dictation and or the spelling work with the patterns that you taught up in the sound spelling card. Then the decodable reader, it is kind of the grand finale of your foundational skills lesson, and it is probably the most underutilized tool to support orthographic mapping, because we don't always know exactly how to work with that decodable text so that it is, we build accuracy and then we build fluency. And then finally, within your foundational skills lesson, you have irregular or the high frequency word routine. And many of you are using the say it, spell it, say it routine. And some of you, if not many, are using the heart word method, which is really to take the sounds and the symbols within the word that we do know, and then we find that tricky part that we have to remember by heart. So these, every time you explicitly deliver these routines within your foundational skills lesson, you are supporting the process. And I'm going to actually go back here so everybody can see it. You are supporting the process of orthographic mapping, which is the process of decoding. And as we mentioned in the early part of the call, orthographic mapping cannot be, you can't teach, I'm going to do my orthographic mapping teaching. You can, however, foster that work in the brain for students. And so that's really our job, is to provide instruction in the foundational skills for decoding work that fosters storing those patterns, storing those words in long-term memory. So before we watch a video, I would love it if you would have somebody type into the chat box of these routines that are here, and you can put as many in there as you can. How many of these routines get explicit instruction, explicit attention in your lesson every day, so that students have the opportunity to do that orthographic mapping process in their head? And if you have one or two, awesome. If you don't have any yet, that's okay too. And if you have all of them, that's okay too. So will you take a minute and type in about how many of these, excuse me, routines are in your lesson? Sorry about that. And it is absolutely okay to say, I don't have any of these implemented yet. I'm not even sure what they are. Depends on the grade level. All right, good. That's good. That's true, probably for several of you. Great, Shoshone. Excellent. Daily, probably 2 of them, but weekly, everything at least once. Okay, excellent. Thanks for that. Appreciate that. So this was just meant for a tiny reflection on where do we sit with delivering these types of instructional routines, all of them daily, but don't always get in dictation. That's tricky to get in every day. Decodable readers, sound spelling cards, blending, fluency, irregular, and high frequency words. Great. So the one that that I see sometimes that gets missed is called sound spelling review. And that is really just where you have the flashcards, or you have with just the sounds. I saw that work done online today. So I was watching an online visit from West Ada, an online lesson, and she was working with a whiteboard, and she had the sounds. They were working on AY, AI, and she had the sounds on the whiteboard, and the little boy was reading the sounds. She was just saying sound and tapping, sound, tapping. And then he actually wrote those sounds in dictation. So he did a sound spelling review in 2 different kinds of ways. All right, great. As we work together in the project, we will do more work here to really refine the implementation of these kinds of routines in your instruction. I just wanted to be sure that you had an awareness that there is a set of routines that foster explicit instruction, that foster orthographic mapping in students. And then if you have those already in your repertoire, over the course of time, we'll work on seeing if there are ways to refine them to support students even further. So great job, everybody. All right, so we are going to watch a video on phoneme grapheme mapping. Some of you may be doing this, some of you may have heard about it, and some of you may be saying, I don't know what this is, and that's okay. So phoneme grapheme mapping, I want to be really explicit here, is when you are taking the sounds and the symbol together and putting them together. Either you're reading them, so you see the letters and you're putting the sounds together with them and reading it into a word, or you are hearing the sounds and you are representing them on a piece of paper or a whiteboard for dictation. So I want to watch a video, and then we're going to come back and talk about not all children need phoneme grapheme mapping, but it's an important skill for us to understand when we have students who are not responding to our daily sound symbol, letter sound, grapheme sound, blending instruction. So we're going to take a look and watch here, and then we will come back and share. So please be ready to take some notes on what you noticed in the video, and we will come back. So this is phoneme grapheme mapping. So I want to make very sure, let me make sure I have the sound on here because I'm not sure I do. Sorry about that. I don't. So when I say phoneme grapheme mapping, I mean sound and symbol together. So let's take a look and see what we can learn.
Hi, I'm Emily from SA Reads. Today we're going to talk about phoneme grapheme mapping. Phoneme grapheme mapping is a tool to help students develop an understanding of the connection between phonemes and graphemes. In other words, what's the connection between sounds and the letters that represent those sounds? Let's try some phoneme grapheme mapping with short vowel words. Let's start with the word rap. We'll tap it out. P. It has 3 phonemes, so we're going to work on the triangle line. Now let's map it out. A. Now we're ready to graph it. Let's start with the initial phoneme, the medial phoneme, A, and the final phoneme, P. Rap. Let's try another one. Let's try the word lock. Let's tap it out. K. This one also has 3 phonemes. Let's map it out. K. Now we're ready to graph it. The initial phoneme, the medial phoneme, A, and the final phoneme, since it's at the end of the word or a syllable, I know that this hard k sound is made by the CK digraph. K. Lock. I'll zap it with my magnet. All done. Let's try some phoneme grapheme mapping with some long vowels and vowel teams. We'll start with the word time. We'll tap it out. T, I, has 3 phonemes, so we're going to work on the triangle line at the top again. Now we'll map it out. T, I, and now we'll graph it. We'll start with the initial phoneme, T. We'll move to the medial phoneme, I. This one looks a little bit different because this grapheme has 2 different pieces to it. So we'll just scooch that one over. This is a vowel consonant E word. So we have T, I, and then we have our final phoneme, T, I, time. Let's try the word book. We'll start by tapping it out. B, k. It has 3 phonemes. B, k. Now we're ready to graph it. We'll start with the initial phoneme, B, the medial phoneme, and the final phoneme, k. I know when I have that hard k sound at the end of a word, and it follows a vowel team or a vowel pair, it's going to be represented by this grapheme, the letter K. B, k, book. Now let's practice phoneme grapheme mapping with an R-controlled vowel. Remember, you're only practicing phoneme grapheme mapping with patterns that you've already explicitly taught. Let's practice with the word scarf. First, we'll tap it. R. It has 4 phonemes, so we're going to work down here on the square line. Now we're ready to map it. R. Now we're ready to graph it. R. R. Scarf.
Thank you for watching our phoneme grapheme mapping video. I hope you get the chance to try it soon. For more information about the science of teaching.
All right. Will you take a moment now and just type into the chat box, what were some things that you noticed in the video? What were some things you noticed in the video? No, click those. And if you have a group having someone type for you, that'd be great. What were some things you noticed in the video? Yeah. Great. Thank you, Cambridge. There are some very specific steps, right? You hear the word, you say the word, you sound, you tap the sounds, you then map it with the chip or the cube or the rock, whatever pen or the penny, and then you zap it, which means blend it back together. Excellent. So nice job. There's some very specific steps. She did the concrete and abstract sounding out of the words. Good. So you like the routine for building the words and the zap. Yeah, so let's talk about the zap. We work with a lot of schools that say, oh my gosh, I really want those zappers. Those are really fun with those chips that have the magnets. Some folks say we have to have those zapper magnets. They're not very expensive. And some schools say, I absolutely do not want those zappers. So that my kids wouldn't be beneficial for them to have the zapper because they'll probably be messing around. So either way, the zap is really blending that word all back together and scooching either those letters or scooching those chips or the pennies or the rocks or whatever you are, blending them together. The idea is to be able to blend that word. It's called recoding. So this is super important to understand. If you do the tap, map, grab, but you don't zap it or blend that word together, recoding it correctly, a lot of times some students will just leave those sounds hanging out there. And what we really want is for them to become skillful at blending that back together, which means recode correctly. She spoke slowly and she didn't deviate from the routine. That's right, Jessica. This is a really important point. So a lot of times, and we'll work with this over the course of the project, but a lot of times in the middle of a routine, we as teachers want to talk. And the two processors that are supposed to be working in the orthographic mapping process are the phonological and orthographic processor. They are the ones who need to be doing the work between sound and symbol. Anytime I talk and say teacher words other than what my cueing is, anytime I do that, I actually kick students up into the meaning processor, which is now they're trying to figure out what I said, the language of all the words I said. So the less we can talk about stuff, the better. The more we can do exactly what you said, Jessica. She did not deviate from the routine. The things she did say were necessary for the processors to do their work and for the student to do the activity. That's right. She's shown a multisensory method. They heard it, they said it, they tapped it, they moved the chips, they put the letters down, and then they zapped it. Yeah, that's great. Cambridge, nice. Connecting the long vowel with the silent E. Absolutely. So you notice that she kept the two letters in that spelling pattern because they belong together. So they were one phoneme. The IE represented the sound of I. So she needed to put both of those down and leave the space for the next phoneme, which I forgot what it was. I forgot the word she used, but time, I think it was, but to put the M in for the next phoneme. So great, nice noticing there that the whatever vowel combination it is or vowel pattern it is with a long vowel, they are represented graphemically together. Yeah, great. Can you use tiles or writing? I was hoping somebody would ask that. So I don't typically use tiles. And the reason that I don't typically use tiles is because of the cumbersomeness of the management of it. So let me back up a little bit. So this phoneme grapheme work, the reason we're talking about it today is you may have students who are not responding to these typical routines. These are routines that students would have in their core instruction, whole group, sound spelling cards, blending, dictation. That would be whole group, typically whole group activity for all kids. Some students may not be responding. That orthographic mapping process may not be taking place as quickly or as strongly as we want for some children. When we see that, phoneme grapheme mapping is a tool for ourselves that we can bring forward. It is usually done in small group. So that's one thing, usually done in small group. Not all children need a whole bunch of phoneme grapheme mapping, only those kids who actually are showing that they need it. So that's one thing. The second thing is you can do phoneme grapheme mapping with writing. Either they have their own Elkonin boxes on a paper and they write their sounds in, and they go to the next word, write their sounds in, and they have those words mapped onto those Elkonin boxes with a pencil or with a writing utensil. Or you can get whiteboards, and the whiteboards have the Elkonin boxes on the top, and you can use a whiteboard for the tap it, the map it, graph it, and then zap it with a marker. So they are equally important, effective, and actually I find the tiles to be a little bit less effective because the very students who are struggling with orthographic mapping processes are the very kids who are going to try and stay organized with those little tiles. So I very rarely see teachers use tiles, and I personally prefer to write them. My favorite actually is on a whiteboard. Draw 3 boxes. Here we go. The word is hat. What's the word? Hat. Say the sound, tap the sounds in hat. Act. Push your cube up. Act. Nice job. Now let's graph it. What sound? What letter? Yes, H. What's the next sound? Ah. Push your cube up. What letter? Yes, A. And so on. Now let's zap it. Hat. So I prefer to use a whiteboard and markers and instead of tiles, but that they work equally well. That was a great question as well. Thanks, Cambridge. Appreciate that. All right, so that is the phoneme grapheme mapping routine. And here it is for you. This PowerPoint is up on the Padlet for you if you want to pull it down, just so you can see a couple of things or take a picture. So here are a couple. So PGM, that is phoneme grapheme mapping. That's what PGM, we have a new acronym. So always use one sound per box, one sound. So even if it is the word dodge, it would be dodge. And the sound here is j, but the grapheme is DGE. So one sound per box. And we'll talk about a couple of exceptions with that in just a minute. So at first, use really simple phoneme grapheme correspondences. If you're working with a child or children who need this process to facilitate orthographic mapping, work with the simple grapheme correspondences first. They can have grid paper, tokens, a pencil, whiteboards. I've seen teachers do it on an interactive whiteboard to where the teacher is actually doing the pushing. So I want to talk about that for a minute. For your most struggling students, they need their own whiteboard. They need their own pennies, their own chips. They need their own marker. Because the multisensory, as you were saying, Shoshone, that multisensory piece for them has a neurological impact. So we want our most struggling kids, if we're doing this with them, for them to have their own utensils. If you're working in a small group where or even whole group, where your students can track up on the whiteboard and interactive whiteboard, and you are moving the tokens and you are writing in the symbols as they say them, that's okay too. I just want to clarify that with our most struggling students, we need that multisensory approach where they are actually doing the work, pushing and writing. So you say the whole word. The whole word is hat. Then students say, I say, what's the word? They say hat. And then they put out the phoneme, a token for each one of those phonemes that they hear. Then box by box, just like I said. So you wouldn't say, now write the word hat. You would say, let's do the first sound. What's the first sound? What letter? H. Yes, write the H. The next sound, ah. What letter? A. Nice job. Put in your A. So you do the writing sound by sound, not the whole word. You wouldn't say to the students, write the word hat. Because if you're doing this process with children, it's because they're having trouble with that sound symbol relationship and then blending it into a whole unit. So here are some tricky patterns. So these are just a couple of things to think about when you are doing phoneme grapheme mapping. That with digraphs, they always stay one phoneme, 2 letters, one phoneme per box, 2 letters per box. If you have blends, so this is important. A lot of people ask me about this. If you have a blend, you want to be sure that each of those consonants have their own box because they do have their own sound. So k, l, a, p. And when we read, we can blend those together into a blend. But when we are doing the phoneme grapheme mapping, each one has its own sound. So there are, if you have the QU, you're mapping the QU words with QU. The Q and the U are just close together on the line. They each have their own box because they do each have their own phoneme. So you first produce the k sound, and then you produce the w sound. It's hard to do on a computer. So they do each have they have 2 different sounds, but really they go together they always go together when we say them. And then X goes on the line because X also has 2 sounds. It has the k sound. So we put that X right on the line. And then splitting the vowel, you saw that in the video today with the I consonant E. So if you're going to map them on the Elkonin boxes in this kind of a way, you can make sure that the I and E stay together in terms of the way you hook them with that mark underneath there. And then the k goes right over it. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of some tricky patterns that might be helpful for you as you are going along. All right, so now how do I know who needs phoneme grapheme mapping? How do I know that? So I want to go back to the original goal for today. The original goal was to understand orthographic mapping, which is the process in the brain that puts sound symbols together into units. So, and actually stores them into long-term memory. That's orthographic mapping, is storing all of those patterns and words into long-term memory. Who might need this phoneme grapheme mapping? When you look at your data, whether it is IRI data, ISIP data, whether you have program data, whether you have a screener like DIBBLES or AIMSweb or STAR or EasyCVM, look at your letter sounds. And if a student has low accuracy on their letter sound data, that tells you, especially letter sound fluency, that tells you that that orthographic mapping process is not solid. A sound and symbol connection, sound symbol connection. And that's at the consonant and the short vowel, that's just letter sounds. So that's at a very simple grapheme level. If students are having trouble with letter sounds, phoneme grapheme mapping may be a big help for them. If students are having trouble blending those words correctly, or what we call recoding correctly, so they can do like p at, if they see a PAT, they can say p at, but they may say Pam. So that means that they're not actually holding each of those sounds and assigning the right letter to it and recoding correctly. So if you have children who would say tap tam or tap pot, which in kindergarten I did, I just didn't know what to do with them. So if you have children not recoding correctly in a CVC word, those would be kids who would probably benefit from phoneme grapheme mapping. Or if you have students who have trouble reading words with those more complex vowels, doing this phoneme grapheme mapping work with some of those complex vowel patterns would be really helpful. So not all kids need to be scaled back to phoneme grapheme mapping, but if kids are not storing those patterns and words in long-term memory, this is a way you can help them. All right, so now we're going to go to a breakout room for you to talk about how you might incorporate this, how you might have been incorporating it. What are some things that you have learned or that were confirmed for you today that were helpful? And then we'll chat a little bit. So I'm actually going to put, Shoshone, you look like you're a big group. So I'm going to have you just turn and you're going to be in your own breakout room, but all you need to do is turn off your camera and then just chat with each other. And then everyone else will be joining into a breakout room. So Caldwell and you will all be together. And so there will be 6 of you in the next, oh, Cambridge, how many of you are there? We'll see how many folks are in the Cambridge group. All right, let's see. 8, yeah. All right, sorry, thanks. Okay, so you will have your own breakout room as well. All right, so please do talk about what are some things that you might incorporate just based on our work today and thinking about the orthographic mapping process, thinking about the routines and students who might need this work or how you already have been doing it. All right, have a good visit. It is, we're going to talk for about 10 minutes and then we're going to come back and have you share the things you talked about. All right, have a great time. Welcome back, Cambridge. We'll wait a minute for the Shoshone team and the Caldwell team. All right, great. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had a good conversation. Will you please take a moment and type into the chat box, what was something that, or you could tell me you want to unmute, that would be okay too. We have a group size that we could do that today. What would be something that was discussed or helpful or thought-provoking for you from your breakout room? Maybe somebody shared something, maybe you got to share something. What would be something? Either type in the chat box or unmute and share what was something helpful in the chat box. I mean, from the breakout room. Oh, yes. Excellent, Jessica. That's a great place to think about doing that phoneme grapheme mapping work, because those students may not be storing those patterns and words in long-term memory yet. So great. That's a great place to be thinking about phoneme grapheme work with that very tactile, concrete approach. Excellent. The X and the Q. Yes, isn't that interesting? Kind of tricky, isn't it? So using tiles versus writing. Yes. And then using these boxes in lower grades. So excellent. That's really great to use them in lower grades. And do you do them, Cambridge? Do you do them where it's whole group and you are, I know a lot of schools use the Alcona boxes projected up on the board. And or kids have their own and they're pushing their own materials. Do you use both of those methods? Which one is typically the one you use the most in lower grades? Whole group and small group in first and K. Excellent. Yep. Friday foundations and intervention. Oh, good, Shoshone. Great. Good, 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 good. All right. So excellent job. I can see you all are an amazing cohort. Shelby and I have been talking about how much you know and how much you are working at implementing really amazing work for literacy instruction. So I'm not surprised at all that many of you are saying, yep, we do this work. Pretty fun. I love it that you said, many of you said you were doing the work of phoneme grapheme mapping and actually the children pushing the tokens and writing the letters in intervention group, because that's really where it sits best, is especially if you're going to go in the full process where kids are doing that tactile and multisensory work. So excellent job to consider that in small group and or intervention. Not all children need phoneme grapheme mapping if they are getting enough explicit and instruction and repetitions with those routines that we looked at the very beginning. Many students can do that process of orthographically mapping those sounds and symbols and patterns and words into long-term memory. They can store them with just explicit instruction. And then some students need that multisensory approach and that really next level of intensification. So excellent job. So the topic today was orthographic mapping. It was really the understanding that it is a process in the brain, and we, through our instructional moves and routines, can support that process for children. So that was the work for today. Thank you so much for being here. If you will take a moment and use the QR code, I'm finding it to be working the best. Use that QR code so you can record your attendance. That would be fantastic. And as usual, this cohort is really sharp. So Shelby and I are talking regularly. How do we take you to the next level? how do we offer things for you that are really helping you meet the needs of your students? So it'll be interesting for me to chat with her today and tell her about the things that you shared. So thank you so much for doing that. So once you have your attendance done, have a marvelous day. We are 1 minute till our closing time. So I want to make sure that you have ample time to hop off.